Good morning, and welcome to day 5, the final day of the Linden Denim Shorts Sew-Along. Today, we will be wrapping up construction by attaching our waistband, our belt loops, and finishing all of the details on our shorts, such as any hardware or last-minute top stitching. I am so proud of all of you for following along on this project. You may have felt intimidated when you considered this project or when you began, and I hope that at this point you feel more confident in tackling projects that you once saw as being outside of your skill level. I know the first time I completed my denim shorts, I felt so satisfied, and I am excited to see all of your finished projects and to see what you have made. I feel so proud of all of you. We're going to grab our pattern piece so that we can better understand the construction of the waistband. And you can see the pattern piece here has green indicator notches. The two that are closer together indicate center front, or your zipper. This notch indicates the side seam. So it will be the edge closest to the single triangle that I have marked as the center back. This is the front. The back has a bit of more of a curve. I have altered mine slightly to be angled in just a little bit more, but you want to be sure that when you are looking at your waistband pieces that you know which side is the front and which side is the back. To begin construction of our waistband, we are going to sew the back short ends of the two waistband pieces together with right sides together. With a 5/8 inch seam allowance and a straight stitch on your sewing machine, simply sew the two back short ends of the waistband together. Once you've sewn your waistband outer, you will place the same seam on your waistband interior piece, a 5/8 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch on the back side of your waistband. We are now going to fold the bottom curved edge of the waistband up 5/8 of an inch. The easiest way that I have found to do this is to measure upward using a ruler or a seam gauge, measuring up from the bottom 1¼ inches. That is 5/8 of an inch plus 5/8 of an inch is 1¼ inch. So mark 1¼ inches up from the curved bottom edge all the way around, and then when you fold the bottom edge up to that line, you will be folding it up 5/8 of an inch. You will want to press the bottom edge up all the way around. You also want to ensure that the center seam of your waistband is pressed open. That is on the interior as well, so when it's pressed open and you fold the end up, you have a nice clean finish that looks like this. We are now going to attach our waistband outer. This is your interfaced piece that is not folded up. You can see the curve here, the bottom curved edge is here, and the top curved edge is there. I have my shorts here, and I am going to be placing right sides together. I want to line up the center back of my shorts with the center back of my waistband. The bottom curved edge of the waistband will be lined up with the waistline. And then you will pin or clip the bottom edge of the waistband to your waistline all the way around. Unzip your zipper. Now when you get to your zipper, it is here that we will want to trim your zipper if it's too long. And I'm going to show you how I do that. If your zipper was 7 inches, which honestly I've never used an actual 7-inch zipper, mine have always been longer, it should meet up. If it extends beyond into the waistband, then you will need to trim it, and I will show you how to do that now. You will want to trim the zipper flush with the top of the waistline, and I'm going to remove the top 2 teeth with a pair of pliers. You do not want to remove too many teeth so that you extend beyond the 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm actually going to do one more. So 3 teeth from the top, just like that. Now I'm going to be careful to make sure that your zipper stays unzipped. I always wait until this point because I never want to lose my zipper pull. So keep your zipper pull low because it now no longer has a stop. But when we sew our waistband on, it will create a natural stop for it. So you can see I have the fly extension behind. Make sure that it's not open like that it's laying flat as it is intended to lay. Sandwich it like that. Pin or clip. I'm going to add an extra one here just to make sure that the fly extension remains flat. So you can see when I fold my waistband up that this is what it looks like here. I'm going to continue pinning or clipping the bottom edge of the waistband all the way around to the other side. I'm going to trim this side of the zipper and remove the top 3 teeth. So I have my waistband pinned to my shorts. You will have excess waistband extending beyond the end of your zipper in the front, and that is to be expected. Simply make sure that the center back seam of the waistband and the center back seam of the shorts are lined up and pin outward from that location. Now we are going to baste. I always baste the waistband on first so that you can try it on and ensure that it fits properly. If you removed any fabric from the back center seam at the top of your shorts, you may need to adjust your waistband. So lower your tension, extend your stitch length, and simply baste the waistband on 5/8 of an inch seam allowance around the top here where we have pinned. I now have my waistband sewn onto my waistline. A couple tips about this. I like to catch my zipper teeth in the waistband. This helps ensure that your zipper pull is never going to pull off the end if you shortened your zipper. So as I'm sewing, when I reach the point where my zipper teeth are, I simply use my hand wheel to hand sew or roll it by hand gently across the teeth, ensuring that I don't break a needle by coming down on top of one of the teeth. Also, pay special attention to the 5/8 inch seam allowance. It is imperative that you keep an even seam allowance in order to achieve professional results. So now I'm going to flip this up and show you what it's looking like. And they're really coming together. So always try them on at this point. If you find that here at center back you have gaping, you can take the waistband off and cut let me show you with this. So this is as if you took the waistband off and this is your center back. You would simply take more of a wedge. Take a little bit of length out and cut it more at an angle in like this, and that will help nip in the center back so that it lays more close to your body. This may be an alteration that you need to make if you have gaping in your waistband at center back. The instructions have fully comprehensive images to show you exactly how to alter the pants in order to have them fit properly. Once you have altered for fit, you will fold your waistband up and press. You will want to ensure that your seam allowance is also facing up. So here in the back, Press the seam allowance up, give a tug on the waistband, make sure the seam allowance and the waistband are both facing up, and press well. Now we are going to take our waistband interior and we are going to place it right sides together with the waistband, and we are going to pin the top curved edge of the liner to the top curved edge of the waistband. So I'm going to flip my waistband over, the liner over, so that I'm looking at the right side. I'm going to slip it behind the waistband and line up the center seam of the waistband with the center seam of the waistband lining. You will be pinning or clipping the top edge of the lining, not the bottom edge that you have folded up and pressed, but the raw top edge. Again, just like you did the waistband, work your way around now the top edge, pinning or clipping, until you reach the center front by the zipper. If you performed an alteration on your waistband to alter it for fit, you will need to mimic that same alteration on your waistband lining in order for them to line up properly. You will pin or clip them around both sides. Lining them up in the front. We are now going to sew beginning here where your fly ends. We are going to sew straight up and stop a 5/8 of an inch from the top and begin sewing 5/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around the top of the waistband. To ensure that this seam is perfectly straight, I like to take a ruler or something straight and line it up with the top stitching along the edge of your fly to ensure that the line extends in the same straight line, just like that. I also like to set my seam gauge to 5/8 of an inch and mark that as well at the very beginning. My sewing machine has a 5/8 of an inch seam line guide, but I want to be able to sew up, lower my needle, pivot, and move and begin sewing around the waistband at a perfect angle. This area will be very visible in your finished shorts. When you turn it, it will be where your button is, and you will see this on your finished waistband. So it's important to take the time to ensure that this line here doesn't move at an angle in either way, but moves straight up and down in line with the fly, and that it is 5/8 of an inch from the top, that you pivot and get a nice sharp corner right there. I'm going to do the same for the other center front. It will not be as visible, but it is a nice guide to have. So I line my ruler up with the line of the fly, mark that line, and then mark 5/8 of an inch down from the top to get a nice sharp corner. Okay, I'm going to go now sew with a straight stitch all the way around the top of the waistband. A couple things to keep in mind when you are attaching your waistband liner is that when you begin sewing here, you sew up to that point and pivot. You want the folded edge of your liner to be folded up. You also want the edge that is extending of the waistband, the additional, to also be folded up. You can see mine here, how they sandwich together beautifully. And this is true on both sides. The liner here is folded up. The waistband is folded up, the seam allowance in the back. And that way, when I trim and turn, you can see that the seam allowance is folded up in the back. and that it makes it nice and clean and professional. We are now going to trim the excess from around the waistband down to 1/2 inch. I trim straight up there. And there. And then I'm going to clip the corners. You want to clip close to your line of stitching where you pivoted, but not go through the line of stitching. So clip your corners. I'm also going to trim this back and angle it back out. If you want, you can trim all the way around, but I have not found that it is necessary. You simply want to reduce bulk around the corners so that when you turn them, you get a nice sharp corner. I'm now going to turn it up. Use a blunt pointer so that it doesn't poke through the fabric to turn the waistband. Now again, you can see in the back that the liner is folded up and encases any raw edges so that it's nice and clean in the back. You get a nice square in the front that is in line with your fly. Okay, we'll do this to both sides. Turn your waistband, pull the top seam so that it's nice and flat, and press well. So I've pressed my waistband. You can see the nice sharp corners. Pay special attention when you press to make sure that you're maintaining your 5/8 inch fold in the waistband liner, and that the seam allowance from where your waistband is sewn onto your shorts is pressed up. Now if you have a knit liner like I do here, it has a tendency to want to stretch. So be sure that you're easing in any additional width of fabric. Make sure that the center back waistband liner is lined up with the center back of your shorts, that it is not shifted in either direction. Now, this next step says to pin the waistband liner along here, along the bottom folded edge, to ensure that it stays in place all the way around. Now, if you've watched my tutorials previously, you know my deep love for Wash Away Wonder Tape, and that is what I use at this point. I simply take small portions of the Wonder Tape. I begin at center back. I have that lined up, and I place the tape along the line of stitching from my seam allowance so that it is precise and that there will be no shifting. I then, rather than move outward from the center back, I move down from the top of the waistline, easing in any additional width. So not smoothing this way, but moving down and adhering, and then easing any extra fabric in, pressing it down to the tape, ensuring that there is no puckering. And I'll show you that one more time. Place the tape on the seam. Move down from the top. Adhere the folded edge right past the seam and ease in any additional width, just like that. Once you have your waistband pinned or taped down so that the fold lines up with the seam, we are going to top stitch around the waistband. My preference is to begin at center back. You will have a belt loop here that will cover the start and stop of any stitching. I begin 1/8 of an inch above the seam on the waistband. You will be top stitching along the waistband itself. So I begin here 1/8 of an inch along the top of the waistband seam all the way around to here. Lower your needle, pivot, move to the top, lower your needle and pivot and move this way. Now every now and then when I pivot here and begin sewing along the top, my sewing machine gets a little stuck. It'll do short stitches here before it grips, the feed dogs grip the fabric and begin moving it. This area is very visible on the front of your shorts, and I will show you a quick trick that I've learned to avoid that pitfall. I take a hand sewing needle and a piece of thread. This is embroidery floss to make it easier for you to see and a little bit easier for me to grip a hold of. And I'm simply going to sew once through the very corner here. And clip. I didn't even tie it. It's just simply one piece of embroidery floss sewn through the corner. When I sew with my sewing machine up to the point, lower my needle and pivot, I will use this to grab behind the presser foot to gently tug to help move the fabric at an even speed through the feed dogs to begin sewing along the top. And it just gives you a little bit of grip to help pull it through. I do one of these on either side. Just like this. You can tie it if you want, but it's easier this way just to pull it out once you've completed your stitching, and that's a little tip that I've learned along the way. So it turned out that I needed an additional pull thread at this point as I pivoted here and began turning this way. So anywhere you need to get an additional grip on the fabric to help pull it through the feed dogs, you can add one of these little threads and ensure you get those sharp edges. And you have now top stitched your waistband, and we're almost there. We are now going to finish the details on our jeans by constructing and attaching our belt loops and adding our buttonhole. So I have my belt loop. It's supposed to be cut on the fold. Mine is cut in 2 pieces, just because that is what worked out best for the scraps that I had left over when I was done cutting my jeans. But as long as you have the pattern piece cut out so that the direction of stretch is running along the width of the belt loop, you don't want the belt loops to be able to stretch considerably along the length, or they will stretch out with wear and they will hang away from the pants and be unflattering. So I have my belt loop fabric pieces here. I'm simply going to serge down the edge of each of the length of the belt loop fabric, not removing any of the fabric with the serger knife. I'm going to keep the fabric just to the left of the knife. If you're using a sewing machine, simply finish off the edge with a narrow zigzag stitch. So I've serged both of the length of the free edges, and you may have noticed throughout the tutorial that I often use a contrast serger thread on the inside of my jeans. However, I always serge or finish the edges with a matching thread on the belt loops. We are now going to, in the next step, fold this part behind. Every now and then, though, it may peek out just a bit, and I have one pair where I used white, and the white peeks out a little bit. So I've learned to always use matching thread to finish off the edges of my belt loops. So like I said, we're going to turn the belt loop over to the wrong side, fold the finished edge in, and press, and then fold the other edge in and press so that your edges will meet in the middle. Now that you've folded the edges in on the other side, we are going to top stitch. You're going to top stitch along the length on both sides, 1/8 of an inch in, or as close to the folded edge as you can. So you will have 2 lines of top stitching close to the edge of the length of fabric. Once you have your belt loop top stitched on both sides, the top stitching will have grabbed the folded under edge and secure it under. We are going to cut these into the length of the belt loop, which is 3 1/4 inches. So I simply set my seam gauge to 3 1/4 inches. I measure and clip. Double check that measurement, 3 1/4, and then I use that as my guide to cut the other. You should have 5 of these 3 1/4 inch belt loop pieces. I have 4 here, but you will have 5. Now we are going to fold the short ends under 3/8 of an inch. So you will simply set your seam gauge to 3/8 of an inch times 2, which is 3/4 of an inch. I measure down from the top, and now I am choosing to mark it with my chalk because it is a dark fabric, and the chalk is the most efficient way to mark the dark fabric. Now I have the 3/4 of an inch line marked there. I'm going to fold down just to that mark and press both sides for all 5 of my pieces. Rather than mark all 5 belt loops, I simply mark one, fold it under and press, and then I use my wash away wonder tape. I take a piece and use it to hold down the folded ends that are pressed in. You can see that each end is folded in and the wash away wonder tape holds it down. Make sure on the front that it is holding it so each of your ends are flat and not at an angle. Now you can use this piece as a length guide when you press all of your subsequent belt loops so that you don't have to mark each one and they'll all be the same length. Once you have all 5 of your belt loops folded in, you can place a piece of wash away wonder tape on each one. It helps to hold the folded in edges in place and can make sure that they're all the same length before you attach them. Now the placement of the belt loops will be one in the center, and then usually I go right above the end of my pocket. So there, and that helps you be able to make sure that the 2 on the side are in the same place because they will be directly above the edges of your pocket. Now you will be sewing along the top and along the bottom, and the instructions indicate to use a zigzag stitch or a bar tack stitch. There is a mention of using a straight stitch, and that is the method that I prefer. I prefer to use top stitching thread and simply do a straight stitch across, back, and then a 3rd time straight across. If you prefer the look of the bar tack and the top stitching thread proves to be finicky, you can always use a matching standard weight polyester thread to adhere your belt loops. On the front, you will do 2 belt loops, and those are personal preference. I usually put them about 1/2 inch in from the start of my pocket, and that helps me put them in the same place as if they're in the same relation to the beginning of the pocket. So you can stitch all of those down with a straight stitch. And once we do that, we are going to move on to our buttonhole. Now you can use a standard buttonhole presser foot. If you have one that you feel comfortable using, then by all means use your buttonhole foot. It will create the standard rectangle shaped buttonhole. And in the instructions you will see that. You will also see that style of buttonhole on many ready-to-wear jeans. I prefer the rounded end buttonhole, and I prefer to do it by hand. And so I'm going to show you that method just in case that is what you prefer, or if you don't have a buttonhole foot for your machine. So this is how I make my buttonholes. Now I have my jean button here. The jean button is approximately 3/8 of an inch wide. I am going to make my mark on my pants 1.5 inches wide. The end of the buttonhole will be closed with a little bit of bar tacking, and the button tends to pull to one side, and if the buttonhole is larger than the button, it's still fine and secure. So 1.5 inches is going to be the length of the mark that I make on my jeans. I have my waistband here and my chalk here, or whatever marking device you plan to use. Now I begin centered in the waistband, centered from the top to the bottom, and about 1/4 inch in from the top stitching thread. So right about there. A little bit longer. There we go, 1.5 inches long, centered right where you want it on your waistband. I'm going to begin sewing on this end. I'm going to sew straight, and then I'm going to move just above the white line that I have created here. Sew along the top, gently round, and sew back down the other end of the white, angling in to meet again on this end of the white line. And we'll see that now. Now I am using standard top stitching thread on the top, as always regular polyester thread on the bottom. The stitch that I'm using is a standard zigzag stitch, and I have altered the length to 0.8, so it is a very short length. The width is 2.0. So I find the end of my white line and I lower my needle down right into the end of the white line and lower my presser foot. Now, as I said, I'm going to begin sewing an angle until I am on top of the white line and then round around the end. When I get to the end, I'm going to make sure that my needle is lowered, lift my presser foot, and pivot slightly. I'm going to use the hand wheel to do 2 full stitches with my needle lowered, pivot again, 2 full stitches, pivot. The pivots I'm making now are slightly more drastic. Two full stitches, until I have pivoted back around and am facing back in the other direction. Now I'm simply going to sew along the bottom of my white line, meeting back at my starting point. When I'm about 1/4 inch from my starting point, I angle back and overlap where I began stitching so that there will be 2 lines of stitching overlapping one another. Reverse. And you will have a completed buttonhole. Just like that. Now you'll want to take your seam ripper and very gently, you know what? I've seen too often where this step can go awry, so I'm going to show you a quick safeguard. Rather than simply seam ripping across and perhaps taking the chance of ripping through those stitches at the end, simply take a pin, place it here, and that pin will always stop you and make it unable for the seam ripper to continue past this point. because you do have to press rather hard in order to get it moving, and it's easy to lose control. And now you have your buttonhole. Check to ensure that your button does indeed fit through. If it feels a little snug and it's hard to get that buttonhole through, place your stopping point here and simply rip just a bit in this direction to open the hole just a little bit more.